All right, as we continue to learn about ecology, we are going to be talking about ecological relationships. Ecological relationships are how those organisms rely on each other for survival. So, in the last slide, we talked about interdependence, and now we're talking about ecological relationships, which is how those interdependence relationships work together. So, the first one is one that you're probably the most familiar with. Um, that would be your predator prey relationships. Predator prey relationships are where one organism is going to eat another organism. Obviously, one organism is going to be impacted by being eaten, obviously. Predator prey relationships have a big impact on carrying capacity, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But keeping those populations in check is very important when we're talking about predator prey relationships. Those predator prey relationships, well, let me go back for 1 second. There are other types of ecological relationships that organisms use to survive. There's something called mutualism where both organisms benefit. That would be something like a shark and a remora fish. The remora fish cleans the shark so it gets food. The shark gets clean from the bacteria. Um, you have the ant and the acacia tree, which is what was on this previous slide here. Oops. Right here, the ant provides some protection and eats the aphids, and the acacia tree is benefiting from that. There's commensalism, where one organism benefits and the other one's unharmed. So there's lots of ecological relationships, but the one we're going to focus on is predator prey, because those have a drastic impact on both populations. They tie directly into food chains and food webs. And food chains and food webs are really just looking at how energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next trophic level. So if we're looking at a food chain, it's a simple um, feeding relationship between organisms. So it's usually one producer, one consumer, one primary consumer, one secondary consumer, and maybe one tertiary consumer. So it's just one chain of events that feed. And this is probably a review for you. A food web is much more complex. It's going to tie in all of the organisms that eat in that ecosystem and how they rely on each other, again, tying that interdependence in. When we talk about food chains and food webs, we're going to refer to something called the trophic level, which is where on the food chain an organism falls. So something that's considered a producer is usually a plant or maybe algae. They get their energy from the sun. They don't rely on other organisms for energy, and they're going to photosynthesize or go through another process called chemosynthesis in order to make energy for themselves. Primary consumers are herbivores, or organisms that eat plants. Secondary consumers would be things that eat those primary consumers. Omnivores also land on this secondary consumer because they can eat plants and animals. And then tertiary consumers are at the very, very top. They're going to be like an apex predator or a top level predator. And then we also have decomposers, and decomposers' job is to take anything that's dead and decaying and break it back down so that it can get recycled back into the ecosystem. We also talk about energy transfer. So, in an ecosystem, in a food web, in a food chain, not all energy is transferred from one level to the next. So, what that means is when you're looking at a food chain, only 10% of the energy moves up the food chain. So, if you start with 1,000 calories at your producer level, the only available food that's for the next level is 100 calories, and then only 10 calories, and then only 1 calorie, which is why you generally see lots of producers in a food chain and food web and only one or two top level predators, because they require more energy and there's less energy as you move up the food chain. So when we talk about energy transfer in this way, it's important that you understand how these relationships happen from each of those levels. So how does the producer rely on the sun? And then how does the primary consumer rely on the producer? So it's important to understand the relationship where you're going from one level to the next level in terms of transfer of energy and also transfer of nutrients too. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you have a good night.